Hi friends, it's Tilly, and in today's video we'll be making the button-down shirt, the TVA shirt, from the Loki TV series. I'm very apprehensive about this build because I tried it last October and it didn't really turn out the way I wanted it to. I patterned off of Simplicity's pattern for just a normal button-down shirt, and it worked well enough, but it didn't really fit who I'm building it for, and so then we had to do a fitting, and there were a lot of alterations to the base shirt that I did, and it just didn't really turn out the way I'd hoped. So now I get a second chance, and we are going to make it for D23 this year, so I'm super excited, but we are in con crunch. So I have taken a button-down shirt that actually fits him and flat patterned based off of that. I haven't flat patterned in a long time, so I was dusting off some cobwebs for this pattern for sure. Words. But I am excited to get started, so let's get going. The shirt looks like a normal button-down shirt, except for one very cool, frustrating detail, the collar. It's attached like a normal short button-down collar, but it connects the shirt across the chest while leaving the neck open for his tie. Then the front attaches to the side seam under the armpits. Lastly, it's connected to the back via the yoke. Once the fabric and pattern were ready, I then cut out the pieces, except for the top collar. That will be draped and cut out once the rest of the body of the shirt is complete. Should be a pretty easy night. Good morning. It is day 2, and I finished tracing out all of the pieces last night, and next I'll be able to start cutting them out. I started by stay stitching along the neckline. Next, I pressed along the fold line and basted for the center front interfacing. Pressed it again and stitched the facing in place. Moving to the back of the shirt, I stitched together the yoke at center back. I then stitched the box pleat in place in the seam allowance of the shirt before stitching it to the yoke. I stitched the wrong side of the yoke to the right side of the back piece. This will make sure the yoke is finished on the inside. The collar will then sandwich the raw edges. So if I want the seam on the outside so that the wrong sides are together, and that way when I stitch it, the front side is front, the back is back, seam is on the outside, and it will be covered by the collar. Moving to the collar stand, I applied interfacing to the wrong side of the collar stand. It was then stitched at the neck, edge, and I clipped the seam allowance. Next, I placed it on my dress form. I know, it's not the right size. I'm working with what I have here. And drape the top collar pattern out of muslin. Once I had the draping, I transferred the draping markings onto the muslin to paper to make the pattern. I then cut out the collar and stitched it at the shoulder seam. It ultimately ended up looking like this. From there, I sandwiched the new collar in between the collar stands and stitched it in place, again clipping the seam allowance. Then I pinned the facing collar over the seam on the inside and stitched on the outside, catching the inside pressed edge. I then top stitched both the yoke and the front diagonal pieces. And that is a wrap for day 3. That's all I got done yesterday. I usually have to sew either like before or after work, and then generally I like to do it after work because we're training for the marathon, so we're running in the morning. And after work, I hung out with my sister yesterday, so I didn't get much done, but that's okay. We will try to get more done today, and it's the start of day 4. So here we go. Onto the sleeves. I started by ironing on the interfacing to the sleeve placket. Attach the right side of the placket to the wrong side of the sleeve, and I stitched along the stitching lines on the placket and slash open the placket down the center and into the corners, being careful not to clip into your stitching. Then I turned in the placket and pressed it. I finished the small edge by folding over 1/4 inch twice and stitched it into place. For the other side, I pressed under 1/4 inch and stitched. Next, I added the pleat to the sleeve by stitching it in place in the seam allowance. To attach the sleeves, I had to do a flat felt seam, which I had never done before and was very concerned that it wouldn't fit in my machine. For the flat felt seam, I put the wrong sides together and stitched. I opened the seam and pressed before pressing the seam allowance away from the sleeve. I trimmed the bottom of the seam allowance and then enclosed the trim seam allowance by folding over the top seam allowance and stitched it in place. You'll really need to scrunch it into the machine. It's weird, but go slowly and it'll be fine. Then I ironed the interfacing onto the cuff and stitched it to the sleeve and pressed towards the cuff. With the right sides together, I stitched the facing to the cuff and trimmed the seams and corners. Next, turn the cuffs right side out, turn the facing to the inside, and top stitch the seam to finish the edges. Last, I made all the buttonholes and hand stitched on the buttons. Preferably, you won't be hand stitching the buttons the night before Comic-Con, which is definitely not what I had to do. And now, for the reveal. Overall, it's not perfect, and if I had given myself a bit more time patterning, I think it would have turned out even better. I ended up tacking the collar down to sit where I wanted it to, but overall it's a huge improvement from my first attempt. Next, I'm going to show how I styled the Loki wig to finish the Loki series, for now, and how I made Sylvie's armor for the show. So subscribe to make sure you don't miss it. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Here are my socials if you want to follow along, and I will see you next time.